Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, an explosion in Moscow kills a top Russian general in charge of the country's nuclear, biological and chemical defense forces. We'll be speaking to a former captain in Russia's special forces. Syria's new leadership is stepping up its global outreach in an effort to reverse the economic sanctions imposed under the Assad regime. Could this also lead to a potential removal from the terror list? And the US President-elect Donald Trump is urging the military to share more information about drone sightings in parts of the country where the general public is growing increasingly frustrated about the lack of answers. Hello and welcome to the program. We start with Russia, where an explosion has killed a top general leading the country's nuclear, biological and chemical defense forces. Well, various reports citing a source from Ukraine's SBU intelligence service confirm that the Ukrainian agency was behind that blast. Well, the explosion that killed Lieutenant General Igor Kirillo was hidden in an electric scooter. All of this some 7 kilometers from the Kremlin, according to Russia's investigative committee, which has called this a terrorist act. Well, the blast was triggered remotely, according to the Russian TASS news agency. Well, the general's assistant, who's been identified as Ilya Polikarpov by Russian media, was also killed. Well, following on from that incident, the former president and deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, who is also a key ally of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, says that Ukraine will face retribution for this killing. Well, for more, we're joined now by a former captain in Russia's special forces, the GRU Spetsnaz, Boris Volodarsky. Thank you so much for your time. What more do you know about the circumstances of what happened earlier today in a Moscow suburb?
I don't think I know anything more than was repeated by international media. I read Russian sources. They're more or less saying the same. There was a very detailed report by the BBC. Igor was talking, and he was probably reporting from Moscow. He was using sources close to Moscow, but there's nothing special to clarify more the case. Everything shows, and the reports from Kiev confirm, although indirectly, that was the work of the SBU, which is the security service, so intelligence service of Ukraine, and that was one of their retribution acts against the general, who is known to have committed a lot of war crimes using chemical weapons against Ukrainian population and against the Ukrainian army.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about Lieutenant General Igor Kirillo, who was, of course, as we were saying, killed with his assistant. I mean, tell us who he was, and did you know him?
I didn't know him personally, but Kirillo has become very active in the past time. He, unlike other generals, other leading generals who are taking part in the war against Ukraine, Russian war against Ukraine, he has been giving press conferences, talking a lot. They were discussing the bogus program. They were saying that the Americans are developing biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine, always calling for retribution. They were together with several other people. He was talking about plenty of secret American and NATO laboratories in Ukraine and all that sort of things. That, of course, it was not confirmed. Never any facts were produced. As I said, he became very active. What is more known about him, that allegedly he ordered more than 48 attacks on the Ukrainian forces using weapons, chemical and chemical weapons that are forbidden by international laws. So, to my mind, the act was completely justified.
Okay, so you're saying he was a legitimate target based on what he's done to the Ukrainian people. Fair to say he's the most high-profile person to be targeted so far since the start of the Ukraine war?
So far as I know, yes, he was the highest-ranking general, although there were quite a lot of, more than 10 Russian generals perished during this war, were killed either in battle or in other ways. during bombardments. But as we talk, if we talk about assassination, yes, he was the highest-ranking general.
As we've been saying, he was the head of Russia's nuclear, biological, and chemicals protection troops. Wouldn't Russia presumably try to do the same if they could? Wouldn't Russia want to try and target a similar profile of individual were one to exist in the Ukrainian military?
At the beginning of the war in February 22, there were quite a lot of attacks or attempts by Russian special forces, and Spetsnaz of Russia has specifically been trained and actually existed to carry out such operations behind the lines. And I know for sure that the GRU Spetsnaz were trying many times, specifically in Kiev. There were a lot of groups. As far as I heard, more than 50 groups were placed on the Ukrainian territory to Kiev and nearby Kiev, trying to commit several acts of sabotage, assassination, subversion, and all that sort of things. But they were quite unsuccessful, and as a matter of fact, could not fully carry out their missions, and their missions stopped at a certain time during the war.
When you look at his profile, as we've been saying, a senior person in the ranks of the Russian army. I mean, are you surprised at the security or lack thereof that allowed something like this to happen?
Not very much, actually. General Kirillo graduated from the Russian Academy specialized on radiological chemical weapons, and for a number of years he was heading the academy before the war started, as far as I know. Russian generals, especially high-profile, high-ranking generals, are feeling quite secure in Moscow and nearby Moscow, as far as they're not sent to the front. So he did not have any special protection, and probably he did not expect any such acts. But these acts, I'm sure, will carry on.
And therefore likely to prompt something of a review with regards to the security detail given to high-profile individuals like him.
I don't think Russia is able to secure, to provide enough security for all their generals who are taking part in this war. So I don't think any specific measures will be taken against them, or to protect them, actually.
Is this slightly embarrassing, would you say, for the Kremlin?
One might say, yes, this is slightly embarrassing for the Kremlin, but under the current circumstances, the loss of one general, even this high-ranking general, is not a big problem for them at all. They are losing over 1,200, 1,500 soldiers every day, which again they're not considering as a big problem. This is normal for Putin. But he sacrificed a lot of human lives to achieve his aims.
Before we crossed you, we were saying that the former president, Dmitry Medvedev, says Russia will carry out revenge for the killing of that general. What do you think he's got in mind?
Whatever former President Medvedev is saying, especially in the past time, especially since Russia started its aggression against Ukraine, no one is taken seriously and even is not considering as a serious claim. He's saying a lot of things that are completely unimportant. He's not responsible for anything what he says.
And what do you think the Russian public makes of all of this? I mean, do you think it's stirred up further discussion about the wisdom of having invaded Ukraine in the first place?
I don't think there will be a lot of news about this assassination in the Russian media, and Russian public would probably not react. It's just one of the next victims, and whether it's a general or a major or a colonel, well, just one of the next victims in the war, they would probably not pay much attention. Much more interesting for them and the growing prices, credits, and lack of essential goods, lack of things that they're used to for many years. So that what worries and that what interests Russian public. The death of another general is of no interest at all.
And when you heard that Lieutenant General Igor Kirillo had been killed, I mean, what went through your mind this morning?
I immediately thought that Ukraine has achieved another victory, a small victory, and they were able to show to the Russians that they are not secure even on the Russian territory, which to my mind was a good move. It was a successful Ukrainian operation.
And just to sort of wrap up, I mean, we're coming up to nearly 3 years since the start of the Russian invasion. We've got a new administration about to take office in Washington in about a month from now. Donald Trump has spoken about the war in Ukraine, calling it carnage. And most recently, he said Putin and Zelensky got to make a deal. Says a solution must be found. I mean, are you confident that it will be?
I do not think that the new administration in Washington would be able to do anything, because President Putin is definitely not interested in stopping this war, and Ukraine is quite definitely not interested in losing the territories temporarily occupied by the Russians today. So I don't see how, in which way, the newly elected President Trump going to solve this problem. He already saw that. He announced during his election campaign that he will solve this during 3 days, or 5 days, or 1 day. He already realizes very well that it's not possible. I doubt that would be possible without any very, very specific idea, very interesting idea. But this idea could only be a full support of Ukraine. So Russia should understand that for them to continue this war is completely senseless or even dangerous for their state. This, to my mind, is the only way how you can stop this conflict.
All right. Captain Volodarsky, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. In other world news, Syria's new rulers are stepping up their engagement with the rest of the world. Yesterday, the Syrian UN envoy arrived in Damascus, and today France sent a delegation with Special Envoy Jean-François Guillaume offering support for Syria's transition. Additionally, the French flag has now been raised at the embassy in Damascus for the first time since 2012.
We are here to be alongside the Syrian people. Through this gesture, we wish to show that France is preparing to be with Syrians for the long term, and I am also here to make contact with the de facto authorities in Damascus, who will enable us to ensure the security of this diplomatic compound and of all the French compounds, and who will enable France to resume its work alongside the Syrians during this period.
Well, the French aren't the only ones who've been focusing on Damascus. German diplomats have also been present, and they've been discussing the protection of minorities and the possibilities for establishing a diplomatic presence there. Well, these diplomatic interactions could lead to the eventual lifting of sanctions imposed on Syria under the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Well, in a meeting with British diplomats, Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, emphasized the importance of sanctions relief and how it could benefit the Syrian people, especially those who have been displaced. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Hagar, who is a former National Security Council Director for Lebanon and Syria under the administration of President Barack Obama, who joins us now from New York. Hagar, great to have you with us on the program. Clearly, you've been monitoring these developments in Syria, in particular the last few weeks. I mean, what are your thoughts on what's happened there?
Well, it's just stunning. You know, when I was director for Syria and Lebanon at the White House, and that was during the first 2 years of the Syria crisis, we used to say that it was not a matter of if, but when Bashar al-Assad would fall. Clearly, we didn't anticipate that it would happen 13 years later. But, you know, I was overjoyed to see him run like a coward to Moscow. And though I am concerned, of course, of the potential for risks and instability in Syria, but my first two thoughts were just the incredible shift in geopolitical dynamics, because this wouldn't have happened had you not had the weakening of Assad's, what I like to call, club of baddies. You have Iran, that has been on the defense, it's been humiliated by Israel, and is literally on the defense since Israel struck its defense capabilities. You have Hezbollah that's been decapitated and decimated. Hamas, which is on its own, is practically eradicated. And then you have Russia, which has spent its resources, is relying on North Korea to help in its war in Ukraine, which is what's consuming Russia right now. And these are the players that propped Assad up, notably Russia in 2014, is really what shifted the tides in favor of Assad back during the civil war. So given that weakening, and also given the fact that Assad, since the ceasefire in 2020 between Assad and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, because nothing had happened since then, Assad did absolutely nothing to placate his constituents, to support them for the reasons for which they had been protesting to begin with. On the contrary, he turned Syria into a narco state. His own military didn't want to support him and were scared. And no dictator can stand without their military. And that's a rule in our history. And so when the military defected this way, that's also what allowed these rebels to so swiftly take Damascus. It was absolutely stunning, and certainly not on anybody's 2024 bingo card.
Yeah, indeed, a very surprising and rapid turn of events. And I just want to ask you, I mean, we've heard a lot of diplomats have been descending on Damascus the last couple of days. The US obviously sounding cautious, like lots of countries, with regards to the new leadership in Damascus. I mean, do you think the US is playing its cards right as things stand?
Well, yes, to put it simply, because they have to be cautious. And you base it in fact. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, you just have to look at their history. And I'm talking about recent history. If you look at their older history, they were an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. When I was in the US government and we sanctioned Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it was because it was Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. And since then, as we know publicly, Ahmed al-Shara, his nom de guerre was Mohammed al-Julani. He had disavowed global terrorism. He cut ties with Al-Qaeda and rebranded the group as a group focused on Syria's independence and liberation, and then adopted this new name. The original name was the Al-Nusra Front. But the United States is not the only one that sanctioned this group. And it's not only the UK either, but the United Nations did as well, which means that all UN member states technically sanctioned this group. And so that's the history. But if you just look at recently, as September 2024, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was repressing protesters with excessive force in the northwest of Syria and Idlib, in the area that it was controlling. It also was arbitrarily detaining people. There's a British aid worker who said that he was detained, tortured while he was detained. Islamists in the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham militia assassinated famous, well-known human rights activist in Syria, Raed Faris. So this is their track record. And so we have to be very careful, given that this is a group that, when it was governing the corner of northwest Syria up until 2 weeks ago, was governing with repression, with an extreme Sunni Islamist ideology. You have to imagine that is what they might, that might be their agenda, although Mohammed al-Julani or Ahmed al-Shara is saying all the right things, and he is saying all the right things. But the US has to maintain some of those sanctions as leverage to make sure that his actions are backed up with the words that he's giving, that he walks the walk and not talks the talk only.
And Hagar, just to clarify with you, when you're talking about sanctions, I mean, obviously Syria is currently held back by two separate sets of sanctions, those targeting the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which is now gone, and of course HTS is on this list of designated terror organizations. I mean, is the United States likely to remove either of those two designations, both of which could be viewed as holding Syria back?
Right. The sanctions related to the Assad regime are more likely to be considered for withdrawal in the near term. And I imagine the US diplomats who are going to Damascus, who are engaging with European allies, with HTS as well, are trying to figure out what sanctions could be removed that would no longer pose any kind of threat, because those sanctions to begin with were placed to prevent Assad from raising, moving, and storing funds so that he couldn't finance his war machine and that he couldn't use his power and abuse it for the benefit of himself and his own family. And so those sanctions, a lot of them can be removed. I don't think anything related to him personally would be removed, but he's in Moscow anyway. But things like, for example, the Central Bank of Syria, that was sanctioned when I was at the White House, and because it was viewed as a key element that was propping up the Assad's war machine. But if we're trying to pursue humanitarian aid now and get the economy going, those are sanctions that could be considered for withdrawal. When it comes to sanctions regarding Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this is much more difficult, because usually when sanctions are imposed, you stipulate the reasons for which they were sanctioned, and it's under US law. And so we cannot, for political reasons, just remove a sanction or for reasons to hope. They have to prove that they're no longer engaged in the activity for which they were sanctioned. And like I said, for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in particular, the US might use that as a piece of leverage to say, well, listen, you've given all these promises, you've promised to protect minorities, you've promised to hold fair elections. We're going to hold that in place just in case, until we see that you've achieved these number of steps or promises, and then we'll release those sanctions at the end of that. But they're not going to do it at the beginning.
Okay, and obviously Syria in a stage of a phase of transition through to March with this transitional leadership. United States also in something of a transitional phase as well, with a new leadership due to take office in just a few weeks from now. Are you expecting to see a big change in US approach, do you think, between the Biden administration and that of the incoming President-elect Donald Trump?
To be frank with you, I don't expect that big of a change between the two, because neither of them really prioritized Syria back when Trump was in office during his first term, and neither did President Biden now in the last 4 years. And when everything was unfolding in Syria, President-elect Trump put out a tweet right away, a post saying, I hope that the US doesn't get involved. This is not something that they should be involved in. And to be honest with you, from the beginning, when I handled, as I mentioned, the first 2 years of the Syria crisis, and the US was accused of, quote, leading from behind, not an expression the American officials liked. But the fact is that the US did not get heavily involved in Syria. We didn't threaten military intervention, for example, in response to Bashar al-Assad's atrocities. And that's left a sour taste, if you will, for Syrians, for many, many Syrians who feel very deceived, if you will, by the US and the Europeans and the international community in general. So we have to tread very carefully. And while Syria does pose a great national security, there are many national security objectives for the United States. It's surrounded by US allies. We don't want to see spillover of any kind of instability or rebels gone wild or terrorist groups proliferating. And we don't want to see them going into Lebanon or Jordan. We don't want to see them posing a threat to Israel, toward Iraq, or certainly to Turkey. And so Syria is important. And Syria used to be the land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah, and now it won't be any more likely. And that's an exciting opportunity. And so there is an interest in ensuring that things don't devolve into chaos in Syria, but without a heavy hand. It has to be somewhat light in a supportive role, given the last 8 to 10 years. But again, I don't expect a significant difference. I do expect the focus to be on maintaining we have a US presence of just under 1,000 troops in the northeast of Syria. They are there to support the Kurds in preventing the reemergence of ISIS. President-elect Trump didn't really understand that the first term, but I do believe he understands why that troop presence is important now, and I expect them to maintain that, because preventing the reemergence of ISIS is critical, and certainly fighting for the release of American journalist Austin Tice, who's been detained in Syria since 2012 and who is believed to be alive.
I mean, we were talking just before we crossed you about the countries that have gone to Damascus to establish, the early stages of a diplomatic presence after a very long absence in some cases. Which countries' presence and which countries' involvement at this stage would you say is most important to the success or the failure of this new administration in Damascus?
It's a great question. It really, you have to have the Middle Eastern countries, particularly the Gulf in particular. There is a shift, and this is what I meant earlier when we were talking about the geopolitical dynamics. It's the so-called axis of resistance is crumbling, if not crumbled. And that really shifts things in the Middle East if you look at the region alone. And it shifts things away from the axis of resistance toward an agenda that is more pro-international, frankly, wants to play by the rules, wants to be part of the international community. And so I expect especially in the Gulf in particular, which has a much stronger economy, has a system of governance that they can share, and also that they had already established certain relationships. Now, this is the most important. At the same time, while I agree, and I mentioned earlier that the US and Europe, their influence is weaker because they didn't play a heavy hand over the last 12, 13 years. However, you don't want at the same time a country like Turkey that is trying to play a very heavy role. They have already invaded the north of Syria quite significantly. We don't want Turkey to play that hand in their favor. We don't want a country like Russia or China swooping in and trying to push things in their favor. Russia's probably more on the defense at this point, but still, for that reason, it's also you also really want the U.S. and European influence and other countries that do have Syria's best interest at heart, that civilians are protected, that things are stable, that they remain stable, that for areas of Syria that are currently not under any control, that they don't devolve into chaos, that other rebel groups with other agendas don't seek to take advantage of that. It will be difficult, though. I don't want to make it seem like pursuing a stable transition to democracy is going to be easy, as excited as I am for the Syrian people, because they've never been closer to freedom. However, history has proven to us that when you have an Islamist militia take control, they make many promises, and often they discover that in order to stay in control, they end up pursuing repressive tactics. And so dangling those carrots of, hey, we could remove sanctions, and hey, you could be part of the international financial system if you actually transition and you say what you're going to do. They could be very valuable, but it does take players all over the world.
Okay, and obviously lots of countries want to get involved in what's happening in Syria. It's a strategically incredibly important country with lots of borders. Doesn't sound like you think, perhaps, and talking to other people on this program, doesn't sound like many people think Russia and Iran are going to be too much involved in the next few months, at any rate, not in the medium term. But with regards to Turkey, some people really crediting President Recep Tayyip Erdogan with having played his hand masterfully with regards to the situation there, and really emerging there as a major global player. I mean, do you agree that he's been skillful in terms of how he's managed his country's relationship with Syria, and how things are going to unfold there?
Well, I'm loath to ever really say that the Turkish president Erdogan is playing his hand skillfully, because I don't trust his agenda. And I don't believe that he's governed his own country very well at all, whether it's regarding repression or the economy. And even from my own experience in government, I always found that his interest was to be some kind of regional hegemon. And frankly, much of the Middle East rejects that. They didn't like it the first 400 years of the Ottoman Empire. They certainly don't like it now. And so while you could argue that he's played it somewhat masterfully in that he has chosen a winning side, at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean it may work for international relations. It may work in terms of future investment, but I don't believe it's going to work in terms of pushing strong influence across the entire country, because there is a lot of distrust, and that is across the Levant and across the region. There's a lot of distrust of President Erdogan. And so, and again, there's going to be an inevitable balance of power. I don't think Erdogan is going to really be able to play this too much. And he has an interest as well in pushing back and confronting the Kurds, for example, which is likely why they have invaded that northern part of Syria. So played his hand well, sure, we could say that for this time period, but I'd be loath to say that that it's going to end up being this big win or huge win that Erdogan likely envisions.
I know Lebanon is a country very close to your heart, and it was close to your portfolio under President Barack Obama. I mean, obviously, Lebanon has itself been through considerable upheaval the last few months and years, in fact. How closely intertwined would you say the fortunes of Syria and Lebanon are moving forward?
Yes, the dominoes that will continue to fall because of Assad's collapse will be stunning. And so one of the things, as I mentioned, is that you've got the fact that Syria can no longer be this land bridge between Iran and Hezbollah. And so given that Hezbollah has already had its arsenal significantly hit, its leadership and commanders mostly killed off, the fact that it's lost its ability to even be able to resupply following the ceasefire that you've had now between Lebanon and Israel, that is huge. And the reason Lebanon's huge is because Hezbollah is the one that's been holding Lebanon hostage for decades now. And with every year that passed, they were only getting stronger and stronger, preventing a president from taking office, turning the country into a narco state, using all of its resources to further its criminal goals, whether it was using the airport and ports to pursue money laundering and other nefarious behavior. It's Hezbollah has been the cancer that has been eating away at Lebanon. And so not only, and it's exciting because not only has it been decimated by Israel significantly in a way that none of us foresaw this year, but now it doesn't even have a chance to resupply itself. So it's on its back heels. And that will allow Lebanon, if the Lebanese leaders can really unite, and that's a tough one in Lebanon, but if they can really unite, if you have the Speaker of the House, Nabi Berri, and you have the Prime Minister, Meati, and you have, and they agree to have elections to hold a president finally, and then they unite with the goal of actually installing in Lebanon a system that is much more clean, it's just cleaner, much more fair, focused on actually improving its economy. Now, again, I feel like I'm shooting for the stars here, but at least this time it feels like they have a chance, whereas Hezbollah was really holding them back. And that's what I'm most excited about to see in Lebanon.
Yeah, I mean, just wrapping up because we're out of time, but Hagar, you sound pretty optimistic just listening to what you were saying there.
Do I sound optimistic? I think I would say that is the Middle East going to be safer this year? And I would say yes and no. You're going to see, because of these shifts in geopolitical dynamics, certain things work out for the better. For example, like I mentioned in Lebanon, in Syria, I'm worried. I am happy that Bashar al-Assad is gone. I don't want to pretend like I'm not, but I am very worried because it's very tenuous. So we're going to see, I think, in 2025, certainly a mix of some good things and perhaps some concerning things as well.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Hagar Chemali, thanks again.
Thank you.
Now turning our attention to Gaza, and with its military power depleted and its political influence waning, Hamas is under growing public pressure to help bring the war in Gaza to an end. This, as Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz said earlier on Tuesday that his country's forces will be free to act in the Gaza Strip even after the war with Hamas ends. On the ground, many residents say they're increasingly fed up with Hamas as they struggle to survive. Well, the Washington Post, meanwhile, is reporting that a new proposal for a 60-day pause in hostilities and the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners includes some key concessions from Hamas. Meanwhile, the families of the hostages still being held in Gaza have once again been taking to the streets of Tel Aviv. They're calling for a full deal to release all of those still being held in the Palestinian territory. Of the 96 hostages still held there, 62 are assumed by Israel still to be alive. Well, relatives of the hostages in Gaza are hoping that the incoming US President Donald Trump will intervene.
We hope to get a good news from Benjamin Netanyahu, and we hope to have the support of President Biden, of the next president, Donald Trump. We really hope that they're going to support us, that they're going to help us to seal the deal as soon as possible.
Very tough situation to be in. We believe that the state of Israel should go to a full deal to release all the hostages in one time and to stop the war in Gaza. Unfortunately, our Prime Minister have other political reasons to do a deal which can result in the death of the hostages that are left behind.
Okay, well, let's get some more analysis now, and we can speak to Miri Eisin, who is the former Israeli intelligence officer and lecturer on Middle Eastern security and diplomacy. Thank you for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Lots seems to be happening. We've got reports coming in left and right. We're being told Benjamin Netanyahu could be heading to Cairo for talks. Reuters saying a ceasefire deal expected in the coming days. I mean, very hard to speculate, but obviously, if confirmed, all of this is very significant, isn't it?
It's always significant after 438 days of Hamas coming into Israel and taking those hundreds of hostages of you said 96, I say 100, you're right, 4 from before, but those are 100, both bodies and people that have been held there for so long. So for me as an Israeli, if 5 come home alive, let alone if 10, 20, or all of them would come home, that's incredibly significant. But I look also at the Hamas side, and I say sadly, I don't believe Hamas. I don't think that they will let them out. So I want to dampen a bit everybody's enthusiasm. I think that we need to be realistic.
Sure, and we've been here before, haven't we? So I think the management of expectations is absolutely key. We did hear, though, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz saying an agreement is closer than ever. In terms of sticking points, obviously, there are some established sticking points, the same ones that have been around for a while. I mean, at this late stage, I mean, what are likely to be some hurdles in these final crucial stages, would you think?
Hamas has been holding the 100 people that they took both on October 6th and on October 7th, and also before that. They've held them in that sense, and they've never said who's really there. And I think sticking point number one is, can we actually know after 438 days from the terror organization the list of the people that they actually have who's held there? Is the Bibas family there? Are they alive? We've never heard that since October 7th, 2023. I say that as a sticking point because I'm still not sure right now that they actually have given the full list. Hamas used that as a bargaining chip, as an inhumane, impossible idea. An additional type of sticking point is the issue of there's definitely going to be a ceasefire. A ceasefire means we will stop fighting, and then Hamas terror fighters have to stop fighting. But the sticking point would be, where does Israel redeploy in the Gaza Strip, on the edge of the Gaza Strip? That would be a second sticking point.
I mean, this conflict's been going on for 14 months. There hasn't been a pause in the fighting for more than a year now. I mean, why do you think the negotiations have been ineffectual? Do you think that's what this is all about? Or do you think they're the wrong people at the negotiating table?
Wow, Tom, I actually have a different opinion than most people, because to me they have been ineffective because we look at the Hamas as a legitimate partner for negotiations. Hamas is a terror organization. They took these people, they took these hostages from their home in a terror act. And I say it with those harsh words because for them, the hostages that they took are bargaining chips. For them, Hamas, the hostages are actually worth just as much dead as alive. Hamas executed 6 hostages in August rather than have them taken by Israel. Hamas recorded before they were executed their last words to impact us psychologically. That is terrorism. For a moment, I don't want to belittle the fact that we need to give, but there's this expectation as if Hamas did something legit. Now it's about negotiations. No, they did something horrific and terrible. And how can you negotiate with somebody who prefers to execute 6 hostages as they did in August rather than have us get to them?
I mean, Hamas has been ruling the Gaza Strip for 17 years now. I mean, fair to say, as some analysts are saying at this moment, they have never looked so weak. And that being the case, it stands to reason, doesn't it, that their negotiating positions will have been quite significantly revisited.
In the last few weeks, with the events that happened, momentous events for all of us, Tom, we're all in the Middle East right now, of what happened in Syria, it's like a 2-stage step. Because initially, that enormously weakened Hamas. Hamas's backers were Hezbollah, and backers, I say in the sense that they participated, not because they were the ones that were in the Gaza Strip, but Hezbollah, when they went to a ceasefire up in Lebanon, that weakened Hamas. In the aftermath of what happened now, with the overtaking of all of Syria, with the ousting of the horrific, barbaric dictator Bashar al-Assad, that weakened Hamas. Having said that, what happens now inside Syria is a double-edged sword, because Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood, and Syria had a very significant Muslim Brotherhood before the war, before 2011. And the question is, will the Muslim Brotherhood Syria back Muslim Brotherhood Hamas, and suddenly that'll give them more wind? So we're at a tricky point where I do think that Hamas is weakened, and I think it's an important point to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Washington Post, again, saying, and they're quoting a Hamas member who wanted to remain anonymous, there is, quote, a desire to end the war at any cost. I mean, do you think given the suffering that has been experienced by the people of Gaza, that's likely to be a widely held opinion at this stage?
So as a widely held opinion, I don't know if any of us know what's really happening inside the Gaza Strip. I think that it is horrific for the 2.3 million people who live there and what they've lived through. They are part of the Palestinian arena. They live inside the Gaza Strip, and I am sure that they are beyond. This isn't tired. This is horrific, 14 months as it is. I want to hope that in that sense, Hamas, that put an exceedingly extreme jihadist point of view in the attack on October 7th, in the way that they've presented it ever since, that has been weakened. I hope that for all of us, especially for the day after. I don't think anybody wants, not inside the Gaza Strip and not outside the world, for the kind of modus operandi of attacking a country, taking hostages, holding them, and allowing, in that sense, Israel to attack Hamas to try to get to the hostages. And we have killed so many civilians while we were targeting Hamas. This is not a modus operandi anybody wants to repeat, and not in the Gaza Strip, not in the West Bank, nowhere in the world. So let's hope very much that in that sense, Hamas is not just tired, but that they feel in that sense that what they've done has not given them what they intended from October 7th, which is both the annihilation of the state of Israel, but it's also about showing everybody how they were, the oppressed against the oppressor. Look at what they have done, both to themselves and to their people.
You make a lot of interesting points. I just want to pick up on one of them. Earlier in your answer, you talked about the day after situation in Gaza. And I'm just wondering what post-war plans for Gaza look like from an Israeli perspective. I mean, we don't know that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, has a plan, but his Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has been saying that Israeli forces will be, quote, free to act in Gaza after the war ends. I mean, that suggests a long-term presence. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are as to what it's going to look like once the war's over.
So first of all, none of us know, Tom, and that's really something that we need to say on the table. The Israeli decisions that have been made by the government are not ones that I, Miri, both as an analyst, as somebody who comes from this in the arena, necessarily support. I long ago said that the 2.3 million people are going to be there afterwards. The 2.3 million people are Palestinians. What they want, what they need to a certain degree, is a Palestinian to rule them, not Israel. I also think that in leaving it open, what you do is you create chaos. And I say, sadly, in the last few months, we've seen more of that type of chaos. Having said that, I live inside Israel, and the government that I have right now that I may not support is one that has a much harder line, as you said before. But this government also wants to survive both in Israel and around the arena. And if they don't, the government doesn't compromise on what's happening in the war in the Gaza Strip, we don't get back hostages, we don't stop. So that for me, the day after, at the end is going to be some kind of Palestinian leadership. I really, really think that we don't want and can't view a Hamas leadership there. So it'll be other ones. Who they are, I can't say right now. I don't know which ones would be acceptable to the Israeli government. Many more would be acceptable to the popular Israeli public. It's going to be Palestinians, hopefully backed by the more moderate Sunni voices throughout the greater Middle East and not the more extreme Sunni voices. Because at the end, Hamas is hardcore Muslim Brotherhood, and we need to accept as such. That's going to be our neighbors in the future as well.
Okay, so a fast-moving situation. Miri Eisin, thank you very much for helping us to make sense of it. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Now, turning our attention to the United States, where local and federal authorities are attempting to reassure the public as multiple drone sightings on the East Coast have been raising security concerns and fueling conspiracy theories. Well, in a televised statement, the US President-elect Donald Trump has urged the US military to inform the public about what's going on.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should, because the people are really, I mean, they happen to be over Bedminster. Want to know the truth? They're very close to Bedminster. I think maybe I won't spend the weekend in Bedminster. I've decided to cancel my trip.
The US President-elect Donald Trump speaking there, while responding to the reported drone sightings. The Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Authority, and the Department of Defense released a joint statement saying that the FBI has received more than 5,000 tip-offs, from which 100 leads have been generated. Well, advanced tech and expert visual observers have been reportedly sent to the region. Well, the agencies report that the sightings are a combination of lawful, commercial, hobbyist and law enforcement drones, as well as mistaken identifications of aircraft, helicopters and stars. Well, the authorities are reiterating that the drone activity to date does not pose a national security or public safety risk. Well, as the number of sightings continues to grow, some elected officials and mayors are left with little to no information to share with their constituents. Local authorities are reportedly uninformed, while a lack of answers from federal officials has left many frustrated. Well, from the Mine Hill Township in New Jersey, where there have been multiple drone sightings, I'm joined now by the mayor, Sam Morris. Thank you so much for joining us, Mayor Morris. For our viewers who don't know much about Mine Hill Township, it's in Morris County, New Jersey, got a population of around 4,000. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But tell me, what's the mood there like now?
The mood is unsettled. It's, you know, since this started a month ago, the mood has been, you know, there are people who are very blasé about it. Not everyone is upset and very stressed, but, there are also a lot of residents who are very distressed about it. They're very upset. It's causing emotional concerns for them. People do not like unknown things flying over their head. We understand we have a regulated airspace in this country, all countries. We understand planes are up and that planes can crash and things like that. But it's the unknown that makes you very uncomfortable. And that's what has people concerned right now.
Yeah, and you yourself have been out with your camera or your smartphone, I don't know which, doing some filming. We can look at some of the pictures you've filmed. There is your own video footage. As you've filmed what we're looking at now on our screens, and we're looking at what appears to be a football pitch with some lights. They are hard to show on television, I have to admit, but they are there. We can see them. What was going through your head as you filmed that?
Shock and surprise. I was notified that evening by a resident that lived that was over our municipal complex where our school and our town hall and fields and else are. And was notified by a resident that there were drones over the area. And I came around here and shot that footage myself. It was, took a minute to get oriented, but, you're watching the way they're moving. You're watching them, that they're stationary. That same evening, my wife had a drone go over her car, which she was very uncomfortable about. She called me very upset. But it's while you take people seriously and you take people, you give people the benefit of the doubt until you see it for your own eyes and you see it in the way that I filmed it. There's always a little doubt in there, but now, it removes all doubt.
Yeah, you've just raised some really important points. First of all, I'm just wondering how large these objects are that are flying around in the skies above where you live. And just tell us a bit more about it, if you don't mind. What happened to your wife?
Well, people are reporting various sizes, but the ones that they get more attention, they're larger. I know I can tell you the one that my wife saw, she thought it was size of her car hood. Now, a commercial drone are known to be that size. They could be 3 or 4 feet square or, a meter and a half square. But some people are reporting these things to be as big as a pickup truck or bigger. And that is to have that over your head and not know what it is and not know if it's regulated and not know if it's friend or foe. That's a very concerning thing.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people in the area have got their telescopes out trying to get a closer view of what these things are, because just a bright light on its own doesn't offer enough information. You hearing a similar sense of frustration and anxiety, really, from your fellow mayors in other parts of New Jersey and other parts of the United States?
Yeah, this all started, just to go back to one point, it's not the bright light, it's the movement. These drones have been working in a grid pattern. They go over an area and they go left and right or north and south or east and west, and they go in a pattern that you can see is programmed. It's not like, well, they just zip around and go in, any pattern. They have very specific scanning, it looks like they're doing. And that's what has people, that's what the biggest thing that upsets people. Sunday, week ago in the morning, I'm in a group of mayors in my county that we all kind of confer with each other on various issues and things that are going on. And we all decided to do a press release in the morning, and we decided to release a letter to our state's Governor Murphy that evening, just trying to stir things up to get somebody to talk to us. Within a couple of days, the state police had set a meeting with mayors. There were 250 mayors there. And since then, it's been a very active give and take, but not with a lot of detail or information, which is very disappointing.
Is this entirely new? Or, had you ever noticed anything like this before in the skies above your town? And do you think the fact that everyone's talking about it means everyone's looking at the sky and perhaps they're sort of paying more attention to what's flying around above them?
I think it's fair to say that 60-70% of these sightings are planes. We have several, it's New York Metro, we're an hour west. We have landing, pathways for Newark Airport, the New York City airports, other regional airports. But here's the thing, those are very definable. You can look to a certain point in the sky and see every minute and a half an airplane going into Newark International Airport. And you know what they are. It's a 737 descending to 2,000 feet, making approach, or the other airports. We all get that. We see those patterns. We understand that. But these are, when these things work in a grid pattern, or they seem to be programmed to go in certain directions for a length of time and turn back around or hover. Last Wednesday night, the night after I filmed, last Wednesday night, a week ago, not 2 weeks ago, I saw and filmed, but it didn't come out well, a drone that was hovering. And the drones have a red and a green light. One side is their left side, one side is their right side. And I saw a drone sitting and spinning. You could see the red and green lights alternating. But my video didn't come out very well, so it's not very usable. So those are the things that make people realize these are not airplane patterns.
Indeed, and people in your part of the United States know all about aeroplanes because, as you said yourself, you're near lots of airports. You're 50 kilometers from Newark, about the same distance from Central Jersey Airport. Given that you do have these airports nearby, I'm wondering if you've got any other sites or targets in your area that might be the reason, the motivation for some drone surveillance going on above your heads there. Are there some sensitive sites around there? There's Picatinny Arsenal, which is a weapons development center about 3 kilometers from where I'm sitting right now. They had flyovers. They put a press release that they had unidentified flyovers. There's other military installations here, but there are military installations everywhere. The one very strong question that's been asked for the last month is why New Jersey? It's a densely populated state. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to share with your viewers, these drones are not hiding. They come out about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Daylight savings here, it's dark by 5. And they're out generally till 10 or 11 p.m., and they are very obvious. They're obviously obvious. Now, there are reports that, and I did see one myself one morning, I couldn't get my camera up ready, that they do go till daylight now, some of them. But why New Jersey and why are they being so obvious in the evening has been the 2 big questions that everyone's asking. Indeed. Before we crossed here, we heard the President-elect Donald Trump speaking. He's obviously got a property in New Jersey, in Bedminster, says he's probably not going to go there. He's also suggested that the US government is keeping Americans in the dark about these sightings. Do you feel like you're being kept in the dark?
100%. I can tell you after that White House briefing yesterday, the group of mayors that we text with, we have a texting group, frustration was over the top, why did they even take up our time? We got 2 hours notice for the meeting. The meeting started late. 3 mayors got to ask questions, and then they said, oh, we're out of time. It was incredibly frustrating. And look, and this is the other thing, look, the average citizen here, the average person here, the average person around the world knows that the government does things on our behalf that they're not going to tell us, for security reasons, for military reasons, for safety reasons. Our police departments do things, and we don't know what's going on because they don't want us to, because it's not in the benefit of public policy. But what we're hoping for is that the FBI or somebody would level with us and say, look, we know what some of these are, and unfortunately, we're not going to tell you because for security reasons, right? And people can live with that. But it's the unregulated concept. We don't know what they are. We don't really think you're seeing anything. That is where it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and all the while, and in the absence of concrete information, people are filling the void with conspiracy theories, some pretty outlandish ideas out there. Let me put one to you, perhaps not so outlandish, that someone here has tapped into a sense of anxiety nationwide. The country just had a very tense presidential election. There are a lot of drones whizzing around in America. I gather there are about 1 million registered drones. We don't know how many unregistered drones there are. Do you think someone's just cottoned on to the fact they've attracted a lot of attention? The media is watching. Here we are in the Middle East talking to you about it, and they just want to keep it going. This is their moment of glory, and they're having fun at the expense of the United States population.
Yeah,
what do you make of that?
The hobbyist, we'll call it the hobbyist drone community. I've spoken to people in that community. They find this is anti-recreational drone use. They know that this actually could work very hard against their hobby and against this thing that they love, because if it leads to tighter regulation, if it leads to more rules, they're actually working against themselves. To kind of relate it into the president-elect's comments, there is something going on. It may not be to the extent. I personally know people have called me and said, "There's a drone out there. Go look." I go outside and I'm like, "Ma'am, it's a plane going into Newark Airport." The lady the other night was only because of her anxiety level, not because she's not a good person. Mayor, there's a drone right by the moon. I went out and looked and was like, I think that's Venus. And she texted, after she come down, she's like, I think you're right. And I'm sorry. But that's what it's doing to people. Having something over your head unidentified is stressing people out. And the way that it started here, it started at near President Trump's golf course and home over there. Then it moved to the Morris County area, Picatinny, Morristown Airport. They were all over the place a month ago, 3 weeks ago. And now they're kind of dissipating and moving to other parts of this region. They're moving over the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland. South Jersey has got a lot now. So it's not something that's just, do I think a few hobbyists have jumped in? Yeah, they're probably having a little fun. But there's still real legitimate drone activity up there that's unexplained.
Sure, and I'm going to let you go, Mayor Morris, but just to wrap it up, you mentioned anxiety. Clearly there's a lot of fear. Do you think mass panic is an exaggeration in terms of the mood right now?
I wouldn't use the word panic. I would just use that anxiety, fear, people are upset. To me, panic would be something where people are going to take action. They're going to get in their car and go somewhere or something like that. I just think it's making people anxious. And there are other people it's not bothering at all. That's the truth too.
Okay.
But generally, and it's not something people are getting used to. It's not getting easier with time. It's still staying pretty much in the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Okay. Mayor Sam Morris in Mine Hill Township, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.